Are you sick of dating TIVs or worried that perhaps you're in a relationship with a TIV? They can be hard work and sometimes even abusive. So in this video, wait, you don't know what a TIV is? Let me explain. A TIV is what I call an emotionally immature person because they are manipulative, combative, argumentative, secretive, and most often just really insensitive. So by the end of this video, you'll be a certified TIV spotter, and I'm hoping it's going to help you become more selective, maybe more reflective, so you can spot the 4 types of emotionally immature people that I've identified. I'll also be sure to give you some tips on how to handle each of these 4 types of emotionally immature people, because when you're dating someone who lacks emotional maturity, understanding it isn't just helpful, it's vital to your well-being and the health of your relationship. Emotionally immature people have a lot of characteristics, not all of them ending in TIV, but if we had to put them into 4 categories, I think these 4 are the most common types I hear about as a therapist in my private practice. The provoker can be insensitive, combative, and disruptive. They're always ready to turn a minor issue into a full-blown crisis. The blamer is argumentative, manipulative, and defensive, and evasive. They're masters at shifting blame and avoiding responsibility. The personalizer is super sensitive, reactive, and impulsive. They take everything personally and need constant reassurance. Now, the fun one might seem communicative, talkative, and even attractive, but they often have their own set of issues that relate to emotional intimacy, as you'll see in this video. If you've ever felt like you're dating one of these types, do me a favor and hit that like button or hit subscribe, and I will keep these videos coming. So before I break down the 4 types of emotionally immature people, let me paint the picture of what emotional maturity is supposed to look like. Healthy people have a nice balance of thoughts, feelings, self, and other. And if you've seen any of my other videos, you will know that this is what Dr. Murray Bowen calls differentiation of self. So the ultimate goal in life is to reach this level of differentiation or to become fully differentiated. But we start off life being completely undifferentiated from our caregivers, and as we get older, we slowly become more differentiated. And as we do so, we gain more of an ability to separate out our thoughts, feelings, self, and other. So that means that we can have thoughts about our feelings so that we can regulate them. We can have feelings about our thoughts to get all the information we need to make responsive decisions, which is very different from reactive or feelings-based decisions. We also need a balance of thoughts and feelings to connect emotionally to people. This balance is all about emotional intimacy and connection. Fully differentiated people have a balance of self and other. So we carry around inside of us an idea of ourselves, but also other people, which is usually, in this context, the people that we care about. When self and other are balanced, we can accept responsibility, we can show genuine care about the other person, and we can have empathy for them. This journey into emotional maturity happens over time. It's a process, and sometimes that process gets interrupted by trauma, dodgy caregiving from our parents or family of origin, sometimes genetics, sometimes life circumstances. And when that happens, you have a biologically mature person, an adult, who hasn't matured emotionally. So one way to think of an emotionally immature person is that their emotional maturity process got interrupted. And if you want to learn more about differentiation and thoughts, feelings, self, and other, I'll put the links around here. Before I try and break down the 4 types that I see or hear about in my private practice, let me give you a general theme of what emotional immaturity looks like, because we don't all fit nicely into little boxes. So first of all, they are, in varying different ways, self-preoccupied. We call that egocentric. An extreme form of that is narcissism, sure, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are grandiose or that they are actually a narcissist. In fact, we all need a little bit of narcissism. It's called healthy narcissism, but emotionally immature people are a little above healthy, right? It's more like things keep coming back to them, how they feel or who they are. They're generally more preoccupied with their self. That means that they have trouble with empathy and dealing with other people, putting themselves in other people's shoes, and that includes their partners and even their kids. So in a healthy relationship, there's a nice balance between self and other, but someone who is preoccupied with self is not really able to take accountability or to self-reflect in a healthy way with how they relate to another person. They're going to blame the other person or think that the other person is less than them, they wouldn't ever be able to consider how they contribute to a relationship problem. This also means that they can't really reflect on their own behaviors or actions. They rarely consider their own role in problems or conflict. They don't ever question their own behaviors or motivations. Just like we wouldn't ever expect a toddler to say, "Mom, I see why you're so upset with me for drawing on the walls with my crayons. That was very disrespectful of me not to consider that it's your home and how this really crosses your boundaries." Emotionally immature people haven't got to a point where they can really appreciate how self and other interact, and that self can really influence and impact the feelings of another person. One of the things that I love about the 12-step programs is that there's a section of the steps which kind of forces people to look at their part in things. And that's all about this way of developing self-reflection as it relates to relationships. Emotionally immature people tend to be very uncomfortable with intimacy. So going beneath the surface layer beyond superficial social feelings is a challenge. If you were to express your feelings or talk about deeper stuff, the emotionally immature person becomes very uncomfortable. They can get angry or rejecting or dismissive. I had a client recently share with me an email they sent to their partner that was so lovely and moving and touching and vulnerable. But the response from the partner was, "Oh, you're such a softie." Finally, emotionally immature people have this overly personalized view of reality, which is kind of hard for me to explain because, I live in reality. If you try to be rational and explain things objectively, it still won't work because this distortion of self and the way that they see the world. Even if you try and take all the heat out of an argument and try and be as objective as possible, like, here are the facts, you said you would be home by 7 and you showed up drunk at 9, they will find some way of getting out of that, which will utterly diminish any objectivity. Like, yes, but I had to go to the pub and meet Jimmy. Or, you're being so sensitive, what's even wrong with you? Or even something like, the only reason you're mad at me right now is because you hate me. Objectivity goes out of the window because their reality is based on what they feel and what they think. Everything else is kind of diminished or dismissed. I'm hoping that you see that understanding these 4 types isn't just helpful, it could save your well-being and your relationship. So let's break down these 4 types of emotionally immature people. Number 1 is the provoker. If you've ever dated someone and it feels like you're walking on eggshells, you might be dealing with the provoker. They can be insensitive, combative, disruptive. So imagine a scenario that you're having a lovely dinner and you say one thing that's off and they become upset because it reminded them of something that you said 3 weeks ago that hurt their feelings. And before you know it, you're in a full-blown argument about your entire relationship, your career choices, and that time you forgot to buy milk last December. To give you more of an idea of the characteristics of the provoker, you might notice this person will do things like pick fights over minor issues. How can you load the dishwasher like this again? Overreact to very small setbacks. Like, they were out of my favorite cereal and it's ruined my whole day and I'm going to sue the store. They can easily turn a discussion into a debate. I cannot believe that you like pineapple on your pizza. There's something fundamentally wrong with you as a human being. The provoker's emotional toolbox of psychological defenses relies heavily on acting out. That means that they express their feelings through behavior rather than words or reflection. Grown-ups talk about their feelings and use their words, their I feel statements, rather than showing us what they feel. That's what toddlers do. They're also going to use regression a lot, which means that a grown-ass adult will act more childlike under certain circumstances, becoming more volatile or more clingy or more needy. It's very dramatic. If you're not quite sure if this matches the person that you're dating, here's 3 questions that might help you get a little clearer. Does this person overreact to relatively small things? Does this person say or do things without taking into consideration other people's feelings? Do they react somewhat impulsively, maybe to certain situations, and becoming overly angry or overly sullen? Stonewalling is a symptom of this. Living with a provoker is a bit like living in a pressure cooker. There's constant tension that can leave partners feeling drained, anxious, and wondering if they accidentally signed up for an emotional roller coaster rather than a nice grown-up relationship. The provoker's partner often finds themselves on edge, waiting for the next explosion, exhausted from navigating emotional minefields, and doubting their own perceptions and feelings because things get so distorted. Here's a few tips for dealing with the provoker. Number 1, don't take the bait. Stay calm. Respond, don't react. You got to set clear boundaries. I am not discussing this while you are so upset. Use your I statements. I feel overwhelmed when you raise your voice at me like that. Suggest healthier ways to express feelings. Can we maybe talk about what's really going on? And of course, always try and nudge them to get help from a licensed therapist. If you are always being blamed or live with someone who could never possibly admit something was their fault or that they had a part in something, you might be dealing with the blamer. They are argumentative, manipulative, defensive, and evasive. So let's say you're a little annoyed because your partner forgot to pick up the groceries. The blamer will magically turn it around on you, bringing up the time that you forgot their birthday 3 years ago, and that actually you didn't buy milk last time, and that left them without breakfast and starving for the rest of the day. Before you know it, you're apologizing for things you didn't even do, and the original issue is lost in this sea of accusations. Some other characteristics of the blamer you might notice is just a general refusal to take responsibility for their actions. Not just in fights or conflict, they will blame anything on anyone and anything else other than themselves. Like, it's not my fault I'm late, traffic is always horrible. They will constantly shift blame to others. Well, I wouldn't have to be so angry if you weren't so. They'll use guilt as a weapon. If you really loved me, this wouldn't be such a big deal. The blamer relies heavily on projection, attributing their own unacceptable thoughts and feelings or motives to another person. They're masters at deflecting responsibility and avoiding self-reflection by putting their own stuff on others. They'll also frequently use rationalization, using elaborate explanations to justify their own behaviors or cover up their mistakes. Some questions you might be able to ask yourself to identify this type of emotionally immature person is something like, do they have difficulty admitting that they're wrong? Do they often make you feel guilty, even though things weren't your fault at all? And do they frequently blame others or external circumstances for their problems? Living with the blamer is a bit like living in a courtroom where you're kind of always on trial. It can leave you feeling constantly defensive, always ready to justify your actions. You probably are made to feel guilty and responsible for things out of your control. And over time, that will leave you doubting your own perceptions and judgments. But some tips for handling interactions with the emotionally immature person in the blamer category are staying firm in your reality. Don't let yourself get gaslit into doubting yourself. Always use your I statements. You got to set clear boundaries around acceptable behavior. Encourage self-reflection without being accusatory. Like, I wonder why this situation happened to you, or what do you think about it? Or if you're being blamed for not being able to read their mind, you say things like, oh, honey, I had no idea you were hungry. If only you would have said, I would have cooked dinner earlier. Comments like that are aimed at balancing out the self and other. And of course, always suggest couples therapy or individual counseling to work on these communication skills, although that will probably take some work because it's all your fault and not. But remember, you're not responsible for managing their emotions or taking unwarranted blame. Your job is to maintain your own emotional health, set boundaries, and protect yourself. If everything you say seems to land as if it were a personal attack, you might be dating the personalizer. They are overly sensitive, reactive, often impulsive. So if you casually mention that you'd like to try a new restaurant, suddenly the personalizer is upset, convinced that you hate their cooking and that you think that they are a terrible partner. And before you know it, you're reassuring them about your entire relationship, all because you suggested trying that new Thai place down the road. You might notice that the personalizer takes neutral comments as personal attacks. You said nice. Puppies are nice. Kittens are nice. Is that all I am to you? They might need constant reassurance. Do you still love me even though I burnt the toast? Do you love me? Do you? They might interpret actions through a lens of personal significance. For example, if you didn't text back for an hour, you didn't text me back right away. I knew it, you're mad at me. And they're going to have extreme reactions to perceived slights. The personalizer's emotional toolbox of psychological defenses relies heavily on introjection, taking in and internalizing external events or other people's attitudes as means that they are experts at turning neutral situations into deeply personal. They're also frequently going to be using a defense called splitting, which is seeing things in very black and white terms with no in between. People and situations are either all good or all bad with no middle ground. Their sense of self and other is off balance. So what other people say can be terribly wounding to them, and they will have big emotional reactions to them because they can't self-soothe or regulate their feelings, and because they are so sensitive to other people. If you're not sure if this is the type of person you're dealing with, you could ask yourself, do they assume you have negative intentions behind very neutral or innocent actions? Do they frequently need reassurance about your feelings for them or your relationship? Do they tend to catastrophize minor events or comments? Do they often assume you have negative intentions behind very neutral or innocent actions? Do they frequently need reassurance about your feelings for them? And do they tend to catastrophize minor events or comments? Living with a personalizer is like walking through an emotional minefield. It can leave partners feeling constantly on guard, careful of every word and action. It definitely leaves them feeling emotionally drained from providing constant reassurance and being so vigilant, and often leads to a lot of frustration with the inability to have normal, natural interactions. Dealing with this type of emotional immaturity is tricky, so be clear and direct in your communication to avoid misinterpretation. Your favorite new statement might be, "What did you hear me say?" Validate their feelings while also maintaining reality. "I understand that you feel hurt, and I really didn't say that you look like a kitten." Encourage them to consider alternative interpretations. "Could there be another way to look at this?" Again, that gets their self and other more in balance. Set boundaries on the amount of reassurance you can provide. "I know that you're upset, but I think that's something you need to look at and work on your own." And of course, gently nudge them into therapy. It's very kind and generous of you to be sensitive to their feelings, but it is not your job to manage their feelings or their perceptions of what was said. Stick to encouraging them to find new ways of thinking and seeing things. It is all fun and games dealing with this type of emotionally immature person until it's time to get serious. Say hello to the fun one. They might seem communicative, talkative, and even attractive, but they're also very evasive when it comes to real emotional intimacy. So maybe you're trying to have a very serious conversation about your relationship. The fun one will be the type of person that keeps cracking jokes and changing the subject. And before you know it, you're laughing at their latest anecdote, and your important talk is forgotten in a cloud of good vibes, witty banter, and social interactions. If you want to move closer to this person and suggest a romantic dinner to build your emotional intimacy, they will suddenly want to go to a bar or a club. They are the sort of person that's going to avoid serious conversations by using humor or distraction. They're going to struggle with emotional intimacy and being vulnerable. They are also going to be very charming and engaging in social situations, but you might have a different person in private. They're going to have difficulty in committing to plans or responsibilities, particularly if there's any depth or heaviness to those situations. The fun one is going to use emotional defenses that rely on things like denial. They're going to refuse to acknowledge serious issues or negative emotions and maintain this facade of fun and positivity. They might also use splitting. They might idealize people, relationships, or situations when they're enjoyable, but quickly devalue them when there's a requirement to be more deep or show more commitment. They might dissociate too in moments of stress. When faced with serious conversations, they might check out, they might disconnect, anything to avoid the discomfort of vulnerability. Now, they might also use more mature defenses like humor or intellectualization, but these are probably often on top of those more primitive ones like denial and idealization. Some questions for you to see if you're dealing with this type of person. Does this person deflect serious conversations with jokes or changing the subject? Are they tricky to pin down on anything serious? Are they charming in groups but struggle with one-on-one intimacy? Do they love being the center of attention in a social setting, but have difficulty following through on commitments that require more intensity or one-on-one plans. Living or dating with the fun one is like being at a perpetual party. It's going to be exciting at first, but eventually it's exhausting. People will end up feeling frustrated by the lack of emotional depth in the relationship. They also might feel lonely despite having someone who's always on and being so entertaining. And they're going to be left with a lot of doubt about the future of the relationship because they can't pin this partner down. Some tips for handling this type of emotionally immature person is trying to get them to stick to things by pinning them down for exact times and dates. Also, just appreciate the light-hearted nature, but don't let it derail important discussions. I encourage you to take it very slowly and inch towards vulnerability and intimacy. If you go too hard too soon, they're going to bolt. And again, if you can nudge them into therapy, that's great. They just need a little bit of help from a professional to develop their emotional maturity. Now that you're armed with this knowledge, you have the power to navigate relationships a little more effectively. Remember, you can never change another person, ever. But you can change how you respond to them, and you can change the parameters of your relationship. If you're interested in growing great relationships, please hit subscribe and like, share the video, because really I just want everybody to have more fulfilling connections in their life. All right, until next time.